Welcome to the Stoughton Public Library, and this is Stoughton Reads Together 2025. The Boston Harbor Islands Adventure is our book, and all the information is right over here about Stoughton Reads. We have a display downstairs with brochures, copies of the book, and information about the programming. Tonight, we have Ken Gloss. He's the proprietor of the Brattle Bookshop in Boston. It's the largest antiquarian bookshop, certainly in this area in the country. Not in the country. Not quite.
One of the largest.
In the lot, right?
It's safer to say one of.
Right, one of. Since 1825, the store has been there in various locations, right? Ken's father took over in 1949, and Ken's been in charge for many, many years. He's been here before. He does appraisals of all kinds of antique books. He has been on Antiques Roadshow for many, many years. And so at the end of the program, if you have anything you'd like him to take a look at. But for now, sit back and let's hear some great stories from Ken.
Thank you, Josh. And I will say, with your Harbor Islands, this might be dating me a little, but I've done tours when Edward Rose Snow used to do the tours around the islands. And even just getting out on the boats are a lot of fun. And there's so much histories, there's so much legends, and so many stories that might or might not be true, but it's a lot of fun. So that's a great program for the library. The history of the Brattle Bookshop does go back to the 1820s. But for all practical purposes, it was going out of business in 1949. My father was getting married. My mother had $500. With that, they bought half interest in the Brattle Bookshop. And it's always been in Boston. People call us from Harvard Square on Brattle Street saying, "Where are you?" We tell them we're downtown. When my parents bought the store, there was a little side street in what was Scully Square called Brattle Street. To make it even more confusing, the street doesn't exist anymore. It's where Boston City Hall Plaza is now. And my father built the store in his great love of books, his hard work, his knowledge, and he was also a bit of a character and a showman. We've had 7 different locations over the years, mainly due to urban renewal. And every time my father would move, when it was planned, he'd move the best books over to the new location. Then he'd run sales, half price, $1, 50-cent, quarter, dime. Last day of the sale, though, everything was free. And he would literally have hundreds of people line up with backpacks, satchels, whatever, ring a big bell. The people go charging into the store, grab whatever they could grab. 5 minutes later, he'd ring the bell again. That group would leave. The next group would come in. And he gave away over 250,000 books that way. Now, the last time he did this, at the end of the giveaway in 1969, there were books left over. And like I said, my father was a bit of a character and a showman. And if you can sort of picture this, he hired a covered wagon with a cowboy and a horse team. And on the cover of the covered wagon, it said, "Go West, book lovers. Go 5 West Street, Brattle Bookshop." They filled it up with books, and they drove it from the end of Washington Street near City Hall, up Court Street, down Tremont by the Boston Common to where West Street is, and then back down Washington Street with my father sitting in back, throwing books out the whole way. Now, the superintendent in charge of traffic at the time was a friend, told him he could do it all morning, but within an hour, the city was in an absolute standstill. They told him to stop. He didn't care. He'd gotten his point across. And we've been on West Street now since 1969. When we first moved in, we were in a 5-story, 150-year-old wooden building. In February of 1980, I got a call at 4 in the morning. The building was on fire, and it literally burnt to the ground. I mean, it was 100% gone. We didn't have any insurance. Matter of fact, the little that we had didn't even cover the demolition of the building. But we found a storefront a few doors up the street. We rented folding tables. People either sold, gave us, donated books. Kevin White, who was the mayor at the time, came down with a carload of books. And even though it was a meager stock, within a month, we reopened up the street. And the main thing was just to keep going. 4 years after that, we slowly but surely rebuilt the stock. 4 years later, we bought the building we're in now, which is, again, down on West Street. And it's sort of the old Dickensian type of store. Outside stands at $1, 3 and 5, 2 floors of general used books, a 3rd floor with rare books, autographs, letters. manuscripts and so on. And that type of business, the large, old, general, secondhand bookstore, is a dying business. And it's not dying because people don't like books, buy books, sell books, read books, but particularly in the inner cities, property value has gone so high, that rent has gone so high, that old bookstores, which I can assure you are not the most efficiently run businesses in the world, one right after the other have gone out of business. Now, like I say, we bought our building in the early 80s. I hope to do this for years to come. I have daughters who are in their late 30s, early 40s. They're probably not going to come into it the way I did. And I've done this literally all my life. My parents say my first word was book. I don't know. I'm sure they were talking about them all the time. And then I worked after school in elementary school, junior high school, summers during college. I have a degree in chemistry from the University of Massachusetts. I was going to get a doctorate in Wisconsin, but in 1973, I needed a year off. My father's health wasn't that good. That year now has been a little over 50 years, and I don't regret for a minute that I'm doing this and not in a laboratory somewhere. And one of the really fun parts about the business is going out to houses and estates. That's how we get most of our books. It's almost like being Jim Hawkins on Treasure Island, every day never knowing what you're going to see, the people you're going to buy, what the books are, and I'll tell a few stories of that, and then I'll tell more stories. But a number of years ago, I was out of the store, and we got a call. There was a message that a Mrs. Fisher had called, and she had some books in Providence. I called her up, and she said, oh, yes, my father died. He has 500 art reference books in Providence. We want to get the best price we can. We're inviting a number of dealers down. Would you be interested? Well, Providence is only an hour away. I mean, we drive all over New England, the Northeast, sometimes even farther, but an hour, that's not a problem at all. They lived on Benefit Street, which is an old street up near Brown University. Got to the house. It was a large old colonial house. Got led through the house into a courtyard, into a garage. Second floor of the garage, they had 4,000 books. Well, it turned out her married name was Fisher. Her father's name was John Nicholas Brown. Family founded Brown University, one of the wealthier families in the country. And after about 6 months, I bought 80% of the books I wanted. I was happy. She was pleased, and she said, my mother has a lot of books. Most are being given to the university. Some are being sold at auction. But would you like to go to Newport to take a look at the books there? Well, their house in Newport is one of the mansions on the ocean. I mentioned this to my wife. She decided to come with me on this deal. And one of the fascinating parts about it was being in one of those mansions that was still being lived in by a family. And at one point, wandering from the basement to the attic, all on my own, without a tour guide saying, come here, go here, do this. It was wonderful. Now, another time I got called to Newport to do an appraisal. When I come to groups like this, or all day long at the store, on the phone, or emails, or pictures, or Antiques Roadshow, I do hundreds, if not thousands, of verbal free appraisals, and I'm happy to do it. But there are times when people need very formal written appraisals for insurance, estate taxes, whatever. Then I discuss a fee. Any case, another mansion in Newport, not as big as the Brown family. This was the Perry family, Commodore Perry, Oliver Hazard Perry. And what they had was a whole stack of papers from the War of 1812. During the war, their family were privateers. Well, they're privateers if you're on our side. They're pirates if you're on the other side. It's all the way you look at it. But it was a day-to-day accountings of the ships. They would sometimes capture a ship and realize tens of thousands of dollars profit. In 1812, that was an incredible amount of money. Then one day, one of the ships got into a battle. The ship got hit. The captain got hit. He lost his leg. About 3 days later, there was a tiny entry at the bottom of a page, and it said, Captain, $5 bonus, loss of leg. And that was the last you heard of the captain. So it's changed a little nowadays, too. When my father was still alive, we got a call from a lady. She was very vague about her name, who she was, what she had, but it sounded like there might be a few interesting things. She lived in Sharon, so it was close. We got to the house. It was a little ranch house. Paint was peeling, weeds were growing, and you sort of say, oh, gee, what's going to be here? She answered the door. She was quite elderly. We walk in, and there are just gorgeous antiques everywhere. Now, my father died 35 years ago, so she was elderly at the time. There were just gorgeous antiques everywhere. I mean, really, really beautiful antiques. And she got to talking. Turned out she was originally from the Boston area, but she had married the Prince of the Ukraine, the cousin of the Tsar of Russia. He had escaped just before the revolution, and she told story after story about being Russian nobility in Europe, all the court intrigues, all the goings on, how T.E. Shaw used to stay at their house all the time, how she didn't think he accidentally died on a motorcycle. There was a lot more to it. T.E. Shaw, of course, was Lawrence of Arabia. And she went on and on and on with these wonderful stories. Turned out her books were lousy, but the stories were absolutely wonderful. And when we first got into the house, on one of her walls, she had 10 watercolors. They were sort of pastoral European scenes. When I first saw them, I thought they were nice, but the more she talked and the longer we were there and the more I looked at them, the nicer I thought they were. And I finally said to her, those 10 watercolors, they're really nice. And she sort of turned around and said, oh, yes, they're all Turners. So she had 10 original Turner watercolors, probably $1 million worth of painting. And it was like, oh, yes. So you never know what you're going to see, the people, the places, the characters. As a matter of fact, speaking of characters, at one point we went to one of our customers' 100th birthday parties. Now, when you go to a man's 100th birthday party, and he tells you he just got back from Barcelona, he's going to give a talk in Florida, and he's been asked to lecture in Tokyo. And I finally said, wait a minute, you're 100 years old. Don't you think Tokyo is an awfully long way to go? And he said, well, when I used to work, it took me well over 25 hours to get to Chicago. He says, I don't think Tokyo's a whole lot further than that nowadays. And here's a man who can tell you about one day sitting down to dinner with Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. And he was a younger man at the time, and he said he was really looking forward to this dinner and all the learning and insight that he was going to get from these men. He was excited about it. He said he got to the table a little bit early. 5 minutes later, Ford came in and sat down next to him. And about 15 minutes later, Edison came in. Now, Edison was elderly, had one of the big horns for hearing, sat down opposite. And he said the first thing, Ford turned to Edison and yelled, my Tom, you look very good. And Edison turned to Ford and yelled, it's the Carter's Little Liver Pills. This man said all night long, all they did was yell about Carter's Little Liver Pills. And he said next time he wanted to learn something, he went to the library. Now, I can go on and on and on with this line of stories, but I'll tell one more. We get hundreds of phone calls at the store, people wanting to know, do you have a book? Can you get a book? How hard is it to get the book? Does the book exist? Or what's the value? How much is it worth? Or so on. And most of those questions, either I or the people I work with, we can answer right off the top of our heads. Some are a little more involved, and occasionally you really have to do some research. But that can be fun. But every once in a while, you get a call that really stands out. And this was, again, a while ago. Lady, I answered the phone. Hello, Brattle Bookshop. Can I help you? She was elderly, thick Irish brogue. And the first thing she says is, President Kennedy slept with me. Now, you have to admit that gets your attention. And she stopped and waited for it to sink in. And then she went on to explain that she had worked for the Kennedy family. And when he was 2 and 3 years old, he used to fall asleep in her arms. So he did sleep with her, but maybe not what you first think. And what she had was a whole series of handwritten letters from the president. Now, handwritten letters from a president, especially in the later 20th century, are very hard to get, rare and valuable. She wanted to get an offer. I was actually skeptical about that, but I thought she'd be fun to meet. I went out, I met her. She had great stories. The letters were fabulous. I gave her what I thought was a tremendous offer, much as I suspected. There was no way she could sell these letters. The letters were part of her life. I left a note behind. As far as I know, her family still has them, probably where they belong. Who knows? Maybe someday I'll see them or hear about them or whatever. When a lot of times, some of the questions that I get, people will say, what's the most valuable thing or what's the most interesting? Now, one of the stories I tell at the very end is one of what I consider one of my most valuable books. But there are things that you either go out to people's houses, see mean things to people, and I'll just talk about a few of those. I one time got called by a local museum to do an appraisal. I'm a member, and I said, look, the reason they needed an appraisal was for insurance. They were loaning something from their museum to an exhibit at another museum, and they just needed an insurance policy to cover it. And I said, oh, no problem. I'm happy to do it. I won't charge you, but I do want to do it from the original. I don't want to do it from your website. I don't want to do it from a copy. I actually want to see the original. And they said, oh, no problem at all. Just make an appointment, come in. I made an appointment, come in, and I'm holding a 4-page handwritten account of Paul Revere's ride by Paul Revere. So, I mean, the fact that that even exists, and you're reading through it, and they told me to get off my horse or they'll blow my head off. And I mean, just, it was amazing. I mean, to actually hold and touch that. Another time, one of the managers at the store and I got called to a relatively modern building, but they, again, wanted us to do an appraisal, but they hadn't told us what we were going to be looking at or whatever. And it was much like this in the basement. There was a folding table, and on the folding table were a few documents. One was the Bill of Rights, one was the Pilgrim Charter, and one was a printed copy of the Declaration of Independence, not the original. This was a year later, but it was the first one that ever had the names printed on it. Because if you think of it, if the colonies didn't win the war, these were all traitors. It was done a year later, but in ink on the top of it, it said, "This is a true and authentic copy," and it was signed John Hancock. So, I mean, and I have to admit, I did put my little pinky finger on each one. What this was is, across from the Kennedy Museum is the State Archives, and they were at one point just going to open their museum. These are all documents in the museum, and they had to send them out for some restoration, and they wanted to get an idea of an appraisal while they were out. Now, one of the asides on that I found incredibly interesting is the place where they were sending them for restoration was in North Andover. It's a conservation center. But when they went from Dorchester to North Andover in a state police motorcade, they shut down Route 93. They literally did not want any other vehicles on the road while they were driving out and back. So literally, I can't imagine Route 93 getting shut down, but they did it for that. And then there are times when you get things in and they're really interesting and fun, and Audubons and letters of Washington and Lincoln and Jefferson, and you get, even Thomas said it, you get to touch something, Einstein. And even though I do this as a business, every time you say, Thomas Jefferson touched this, put his eye, it still sends a chill up your back. But then there can be other things that happen. We one time got a large collection in of cookbooks, about a few thousand cookbooks. Some of them went back to the 17 and 1800s. Some were newer, but very good cookbooks. I mean, it was a great collection. But there was also a box of these old pamphlets, like gold medal flour, how to make Jell-O, Baker Chocolate Company. I mean, little pamphlets, probably from the 1890s to about the 1920s. A lot of them are very colorful, nice. But I said to one of the people working, I said, look, we've got to spend our time on the really rare stuff. Just put this out at the dollar table. There's some bargains in there, but people will like them, but we just don't have the time. So we put them out, and about 2 hours later, a man comes running in with one of them, and he goes, he was beside himself. It's really hard to describe how thrilled, happy, and he goes, I've been looking for this for years and years and years, and it's out on your dollar table. And he was just going on and on and on. It was just, he was so thrilled. And then I looked at the pamphlet, and the title was Coconuts and Constipation. So you never, ever know what people are looking for, what they want. And he was still thrilled. Now, one of the things people also ask, do I collect books? And my general answer is no, but I really don't. One of the reasons I generally don't collect books is when I was growing up, my father would bring home 4 or 5 books a day. Do that for 30 or 40 years, and you can imagine what our house looked like. It was heaps and piles. Now, I read a lot of books. I read a lot of books about book collecting, about local history. I like Stephen King and John Grisham and sports and so on, but I tend to read them and then bring them back to the store and sell them. But there are a couple of collections we had. My wife collected books on jazz and roots music, and she had about 1,000 books on that. She had some wonderful studio photos, those 8x10 photos. Some of them were really great. I mean, she had one that W.C. Handy had inscribed to Scott Joplin. The one she liked the best was she had one that was a picture of a marquee. It was a Louis Armstrong in the bottom featuring Billie Holiday, and it was inscribed, "To Pops who taught me everything, love Billy." But we downsized just before the pandemic. She said, you know, a lot of these people that I like, 10 years from now, people aren't going to know who they are. It's time. And the day we put them in the store, another colleague of ours walked in. He goes, "I've got someone who'd love this," and so on. And my wife said, "Well, we also have all the books." They bought the whole collection in London, sold it, and, you know, we didn't know what happened to it. But then just last year, we were looking at an auction, and Charlie Wood from the Rolling Stones died, and he was the one who had bought our collection. So that was fun. And then there was another collection that I had. Now, people, before they had dust jackets widely used in books, a lot of books had very decorative bindings. And the reason they had decorative bindings, a lot of the publishers figured that if, when you walked in a store, if the book caught your eye, there's a better chance you'd buy it. And there are people who collect books like this. You can buy them at library sales, book sales, auctions, flea markets. I mean, some are expensive, but you can get a lot of them very, very cheaply. And individually, they might not seem like much, but as a collection, graphically, they can be quite good. And I one time got a book that had a picture of a toilet on the cover. The title was "Flushed with Pride, The Life of Thomas Crapper, who invented the toilet." I brought it home. I showed it to my wife. She took one look at it and said, "We have to put that in the bathroom." So we did. A couple of days later, I got a book that had a big eye staring out of the cover. The title was "We Never Sleep." It was a history of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. But with a big eye staring at you, I thought, put that in the bathroom too. Now, this is a little half bathroom, so there's no shower, no steam. Next thing you know, we built bookshelves, and there were about 400 of these Victorian-style illustrated books in the bathroom. People would walk in, they'd be a little taken aback, but loads of reading material. And one of the rules of the collection was that nothing could be valuable, because every once in a while a book would fall off the shelf. You can imagine where it ended up, and so nothing was valuable. Now, one thing I do collect is I collect stories. Now, you won't be able to see this, but there's page after page after page of either a word, a sentence, a phrase. Every single one of those things is a story. And I could literally, I won't do this, could put it on the wall, throw dots at it, because I don't want to put holes, and I could do a whole lecture just from where they hit. And some of them, you know, it can be really, really interesting. You know, some things like, I had a cousin, he had a collection, he collected books on 1968, a whole collection of just books. He just felt it was an important year, and he was in politics, and he felt 68 was popular. One of the things that happens, and we go out to houses almost every day, and people call up and say, "Do you have any book?" You know, main reason people sell books is either they're moving from the big to the small, or it's an estate. And usually the first question we ask people is, "How many books do you have?" And usually the first answer is a lot. And then we say, "Well, what kind of books do you have?" And the usual first answer is fiction and nonfiction. which is every book ever done. So we try to narrow it down, get some idea of any particular subject area fields, or nowadays, if the books are on shelves, digital pictures. You can take 2, 3, 4 shelves in one picture. If it's in focus, we can see it. But we do go almost every day out. And again, that's how we get books. It's fun. People also don't realize that used books, they think of used books that you sit around a bookstore, you get old books in, you look at them, you talk with customers and so on. What they don't think about is if you buy 1,000 books in a fifth floor walk-up in 95-degree weather, you've got to carry 1,000 books out of a fifth floor walk-up in 95-degree weather. A job interview at the Brattle Bookshop goes, do you have any old sports injuries, back injuries, neck injuries, arm injuries? Do you have any allergies to dust, mold, or mildew? We get through all of that, and then we go, well, where did you go to school? What's your background? And so on. But we do go out almost every day, and every once in a while, someone will call and postpone on us. I mean, it could be health issues, child care issues, a number of things. And it happens. It can be a little frustrating just because it's, you had that time planned and whatever, but it's also understandable. Usually you reschedule and go out. We had a colleague of ours, a friend really, 20 years ago or more, and he was on a little bit of hard time and he needed some money, and he had a storage area in Cambridge, and it was a nice storage area. It had lights, it had electricity, had all of that, and he called and he postponed on us, and fine, we rescheduled. He called, he postponed, he rescheduled, he called, postponed, I finally said after 4 times, I said, Russ, if you postpone on us again, I don't care what you have in that warehouse, we're not going. I was just really frustrated. The 5th time, that morning, he calls up and says, I've got to postpone it, but it's not my fault. It's not my fault. And he went on to explain that the lady who owned the storage area next to him, that night, the night before, she was literally, it was actually a really sad story because 20 years before that, she had had an abusive alcoholic husband who had run out on the family and was gone, and just a hard life. Anyway, she was literally on her deathbed, and her daughter was with her, and she said to her daughter, tomorrow I want you to I have a storage area in Cambridge. I want you to go to the storage area. When you open the storage area, you'll see a freezer. In the freezer, you'll find your father. She had murdered him 20 years before, put him in a freezer in this story, and it was next to, and I said, okay, Russ, that's a good, and it was on the news, the police were there, so it wasn't, I mean, you can't make up stuff like that. It really did happen. And one of the things that I'll talk about too a little, now one of the things I will say is I do a podcast called Brattlecast. There are a little over 200 20-minute episodes. So if you like these stories, Brattlecast, you can get it on Apple or it's through our website. Just say you like it. That would be nice. One of the things that my wife says about me now is because I love doing this, but as I'm getting a little older, she says I only work half a day. I get in at 5:30 in the morning. The store closes at 5:30. That's 12 hours. That's half a day. And when I'm doing this, it's even a little later, but I enjoy it and it's fun. And one of the things that I have done for a number of years, and I hope many of you watch, is Antiques Roadshow. It's a lot of fun to do. I've actually been to every state now. And I'm fortunate when I do the show because usually my wife comes with me. And usually we can go a few days early and actually see. I mean, why would you ever go to Fargo or Bismarck or Boise? But anywhere you go in this country, I don't care if you spend any type of effort or time at all, it's gorgeous. The people are wonderful. Do not talk about politics and religion. But it's a great city. And the roadshow, I hope everyone watches because the more people watch, the better their ratings. The better the ratings, the more PBS renews it every year. And the way that show works is basically you appraise in whatever city it is. It used to be in convention centers. Now it's at museums and gardens and whatever. And there usually is about 3 to 4,000 people come to a show. Each person brings 2 items, so there's 6 to 8,000 items come to a show. And they first, when they come in, they go to one table where there are what they call triage. So there's a bunch of appraisers who don't appraise, but they say, you go to books, you go to prints, you go to art, you go to whatever, and then they go to the tables. Now, one thing a lot of people don't realize about the show is we don't get paid at all. They don't pay travel, they don't pay hotel, they don't pay meals, but it's public television, and 5+ million people watch it. So if you get on TV, that's really good. Now, and there's no guarantee that you're going to get on TV, because unless someone comes in with something really interesting that they don't know everything there is to know about it, that a producer wants to put on TV, you could spend the whole day and not get on. So an ideal day for an Antiques Roadshow appraiser is you start at 7:30, and there are 3 book appraisers next to prints, next to photography, next to whatever. And but someone will come in at 8:30 in the morning. They'll have something interesting. You call a producer over. You tell the producer out of earshot of the guest, this is what they have, why I want it to go on TV. The producer talks to the person. They say, great, go on TV. 9 o'clock, you're done with that. So you've got something done. So the rest of the day goes really easily. If it's about 4 or 5 in the afternoon and you haven't taped anything, it gets very nerve-wracking, because there's a good chance you might not. Now, there was one city, Kansas City, a man came in and he had about 8:30 in the morning. He came in and he had a few interesting things, nothing great, from Pope John Paul. He had some rosary beads and so on. And it was nice, but no great thing. And then he pulls out some 8x10 photographs he had. Turned out he was the pilot who flew the Pope and his entourage around the country in the 70s when he came. And then he started telling stories of what was going on behind the scenes and what people were doing. This is getting more interesting. And then he pulled out this one picture. And usually when you see someone pictured with the Pope, it's very formal. The Pope's in his vestments. He's holding his hand out. People are kneeling. They kiss the ring, get a photo taken. And it's a very formal. But this was different. This was the pilot who was in the pilot seat in the cockpit in his uniform. The Pope was in his full vestments, but literally with one leg up in the air, reaching over, signing his Bible. And I'm going, oh, this is great. I mean, it's one, he has the stories here. And I say, great, let me see the Bible. And he goes, oh, I didn't bring that. And I go, can you go get it? He goes, well, it's in a bank deposit and it's Saturday. No, I can't get it. And it was like, later in the day, I did tape something else, but it was like, And one of the things that a couple of years, my wife did appraisals on the roadshow. Now, when you do the appraisals on the roadshow, you're standing there 12 hours or sitting or appraising. And I enjoy that, and she wasn't as thrilled with it. So she only did it a year or two. But when you come to groups like this, or people come into the store, or on whatever thing, or at the roadshow, 99% of the people are happy. You know, if you tell them their things are very valuable, obviously if they get on TV, but you suspect sometimes that if you say, well, it's really not, I have loads of ways of saying something's not valuable nicely. But a lot of people, when I first started doing this, I thought that would get disappointing. Loads of people, 90% of the people you tell it's not valuable say, oh, fabulous, now I don't have to worry about it. I can give it to the library book sale. I can give it to the grandchildren. I can read it. But you can never make everybody happy no matter what you do. My wife was doing an Antiques Roadshow, and one of the things when you're doing that show that you have to realize is people get tickets for it. Now, usually they give out 3,000 or 4,000 tickets in a lottery. They're free. But there might be 20,000 people who applied for those tickets. So literally, they've won the lottery to get the tickets. Some people drive literally hundreds, even 1,000 miles if they get the ticket to get to the show. They get to the show, they wait in line to get to that triage table. Then from there, they wait in line at your table. And so no matter what they have, you want to give them some time. You want to treat them nicely. You want them to be happy, even if it isn't any case. And then there are people that no matter what you do, say, whatever the setting is, you can not make happy. And this was sort of an extreme example of this. Lady came up to my wife at the Antiques Roadshow, and she says, I have a book signed by A. Lincoln. And my wife takes the book, looks at it, opens it up, and says very nicely, the book is signed by A. Lincoln, but not the A. Lincoln we both want it to be. And the lady in this tone goes, how can you tell? And my wife has the book and very nicely turns it to the title page, says, well, the first clue is this book was printed in 1911. The lady goes, so? And my wife goes, well, I learned in school he was assassinated in 1865. Slams the book closed, said, you don't know what you're talking about, and storms off. And it's just in a very extreme case that when people believe something they absolutely want to believe, no matter what you say, you're not going to change their mind. And matter of fact, even sometimes I find that someone brings me something and they go, this is signed by, Dickens or by Albert Einstein, or this is a first. You want it to be what they want it to be so badly, you can almost talk yourself into it. And that's where it's very good to have colleagues who not only you don't have to know everything yourself, you just have to know who does know. And it's on top of that, you have to know them and be friendly enough with them that if you ask them a question or send them a picture, they'll answer you. But that's where a lot of that goes. Now, I can go on and on and on. I've got hundreds of stories. But I'll tell you what, why don't I see if there are some questions? And quite honestly, no matter what you ask me, I can go off on a tangent anyway. So, but does anyone have any questions?
Well, I have a question in regards to the Stoughton Reads Together book. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
Which one?
Boston Harbor Islands Adventure by Stephanie Shuro and the Friends of the Boston Harbor Islands. But the whole premise is this journal from 1891 that, and I forget the name of the Harvard professor who found the journal in a used bookstore. And part of the reason why he purchased it, I guess, was one, he knew it was old, right? And he was afraid that people were going to buy it, separate it, and sell it individually. And I had never heard of that. And I guess, does that really happen?
Well, the question is the book of the month that someone found a journal in a used bookstore. It's about a trip to the islands. And part of the reason they bought it was they're afraid that someone take it and take the pages out and sell them individually. It doesn't happen often with journals. One of the problems with journals, and sometimes why they can be just there in a bookstore, is, and when people want you to appraise a journal, the main thing about any journals, this handwritten journals, you've got to read them to know what, I mean, when people approach me with journals or call up and say I say, do you have at least a summary, an outline, maybe a page or two that are more interesting? Because just the time and effort to read through that can be a lot. A journal like that, probably someone would not take it apart one page at a time. But there are cases where most old maps that you see came out of atlases, Audubons, or those type of prints. When you see the individual prints, they were in books. Many times selling each individual piece can be more than the total. The problem is they can take a whole lot more time, effort, and work. And then there's a whole ethical. Do you take books apart? Do you do this? And I could argue it on one side and argue it on another, especially if something's damaged. Then many times people will take it apart. The first printed book was in 1456, the Gutenberg Bible in Western culture. The Gutenberg Bible now if it ever came up for sale, the whole thing might sell. The last time it sold was about $35 million. That was a long time. It would probably sell for 100 or 200 million. But there were a few copies in the past that were badly damaged, and they took single pages out, wrote them in a big essay, put them in a beautiful leather binding, and it enabled people at the time who couldn't afford to buy a, quote, Gutenberg Bible, could get a page from it. Now, those pages now sell $100,000, $150,000, but it's a lot less than $100 million. So in that case, maybe, maybe not. Also, sometimes, especially if there's artwork and so on, but in journals, if it's a complete journal, usually you want to keep it together. It loses all the historical value. There's a famous set of Thoreau that Houghton Mifflin, the publisher, put out. And one of the things they did, it was nicely bound, but one of the things they did to make it more attractive was they took pages of his manuscripts and they put one page in each one. And so it was a deluxe limited edition. And in some libraries are even trying to buy back individual ones to put it back together. But that wasn't that unusual. Generally, you want to keep it together. Now, a journal like that, the value of the journal would depend on what is it about, who wrote it. I mean, is it someone famous? Or what did it tell about the people, the places, the things? And where it's sort of a local item, it really goes into account. If it's a woman, there are less journals like that by women. If it gives some sort of insight to the time, the place, the people, those actually are quite well collected now. One consideration of value, though, is if whoever is the dealer might be who's handling it, if they've got to spend a week, 2, 3 weeks researching it, that might be a big part of the value, and then promoting the story. But no, I mean, that's a great item, and then to get it printed and published opens it up to the world. And I'm sure that probably digitally will be available too. So it's a great thing. Like I said, I used to take trips with Edward Rowe Snow around the Harbor Islands, and he told stories. Edward Rowe Snow was a father of mine, and sometimes people ask about books signed by the author. Does that add to the value? And I mean, I've had books signed by very famous authors, and in many cases it would be valuable. But Edward Rowe Snow told us a story, and this is very typical of his Harbor Island tours. He went into a bookstore in Cape Cod once, and he said he didn't know the owner of the store, and Snow said he went up to the section where his books were, pulled one off the shelf, opened it up, and exclaimed out loud, "My, a rare, unsigned copy." And then he took out a pen and signed it, and then he introduced himself to the owner of the store. So sometimes signed or journals or so on. But I would even love to have, if Edward Rowe Snow had kept a journal of the people who went on his tours and some of the characters and things, that would be fascinating. So journals are very important. They can give great insights into history, and particularly if they give something that's sort of behind the scene, like Civil War. There are a lot of journals, or military or war. I would love to get a journal of the Civil War of the cook for the company, describing how they got supplies, how they made the food, what they were making, how the people reacted to it, how they ate. That I would find much more interesting than a soldier. And there are little things in journals that sometimes can add or subtract. See what I mean about tangents? I got a Civil War journal in, a little earlier than that. And it was a typical Civil War journal. It was a couple of years in the war. And it's something that would sell for $500, $1,000. It was relatively well written. That's also important, how well it's written. But there were 2.5 pages in the journal. The man had a day off. It was 1864. And on that day off, he played a game of baseball. And in that game of baseball, he got hit by a ball, run down on the bases, and jammed his legs. And he said in that one baseball game, he had more injuries than in 2 years of battle in the Civil War. But because he mentioned baseball in the Civil War in the 1860s, instead of a few $100s, it sold for $10,000 to a baseball collector. So there can be that little thing that adds or subtracts. But that sounds fascinating. Actually, when I get one in, and I'll get one eventually, I'll skim through it because I love the islands. Any other questions or? Yes.
So growing up, we had a set of encyclopedias. I have no idea what happened to them, but are those worth money?
The question is, growing up, you had a set of encyclopedias. Are encyclopedias worth money? In most cases, no. As a matter of fact, they're even difficult to give away. I mean, if you're talking about, mid-century Britannica, Americana, Funk and Wagnalls, nobody wants them, cares, and they're hard to give away. But there are, like the first Encyclopedia Britannica was done in the 1760s. That's a valuable one. There's a very famous edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica called the 11th edition that was done around 1911. It's the most scholarly edition they ever did. A lot of the stories and articles are really good. Scholars used to buy them for $200, $300, $500 regularly. We can't sell them anymore, mainly because it's been digitized. It's online for free, and it's keyword searchable. So people don't have to use this much room on their shelves, and all the information is there. And that's actually a big change. Any book that you would buy just because you needed the information. In other words, a picture of the old scholar, he or she would have hundreds of books all around them, so that if you asked, when was the Battle of Waterloo, they could reach up, pull down. Now all you do is click, and so books that people bought not because they wanted the object, but because they wanted the information. Dictionaries, you don't buy those. But it even goes beyond art books, with the big pictures of Da Vinci or Georgia O'Keeffe or so on. If you've got a good computer screen, the pictures are better. So a lot of the art books that were hundreds of dollars now are $5 and $10. Even beyond that, I had a friend of mine retired. He wanted to take up tennis and chess. In tennis, we went to look in our store. Do we have any good books on tennis? And he looked, and we had a few, and he said, YouTube's actually better because you can actually see people stroking or chess. And so how-to books, knitting, how to fix your car, how to do that. YouTube's. And there's nothing wrong with that. The information is out there, free, valuable. I have a daughter who lives in Kenya. The fact that they can access the world's knowledge quickly, easily, and is fabulous. It's not the greatest thing for a used bookstore in all cases, but we survive very well anyways. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about some of the more interesting collectors and type of collections that are so unusual that you might have come across?
Well, talk about some of the collectors and some of the more unusual things. Well, here's one that a lot of people won't understand. I got called by a library to do a quick appraisal, or they wanted to see whether it really needed an appraisal. And I majored in chemistry, so I like science books. And I got called in, and the school had a first edition of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica in the 1600s, which is basically the foundation for all modern mathematics. The book itself, by itself, is over $1 million. But this was Isaac Newton's copy with his notes in the margins. But what you don't realize about this thing is I also appraised it in Isaac Newton's study, his original study, but I was in Wellesley, Massachusetts. A lot of people don't realize that Isaac Newton's study is at Babson College. Roger Babson was a tremendous collector of anything he could get of Isaac Newton, to the point where he bought his study, had it shipped over to the United States. Roger Babson was a very wealthy financial analyst. And so the unusual part about that collection is I don't know whether Babson likes people going there, say, can I go in Isaac Newton's study? But it is there. I've won that. Another, I was talking about, when I first started working with my father, we had this wonderful customer in. He lived in Concord, and he collected Walden. He had 3,000 copies of Walden. He had first editions in every binding. He had every edition he could find through the years, in paperback, hardcover, illustrated, different colors, languages, and so on. And it sounds like, gee, what a strange, but when you look at it all together, it's actually fascinating how, when you see over the time how the book was produced, the illustrations they used, the quality, you could see sort of how it went up and down in popularity, and the quality of the printing, the quality of the illustrations, how many issues and things were done at different times. So there were more in this year than that year. It was actually a fascinating collection, but it was Walden, one book. And so that was a little bit unusual. I one time bought a collection of 2,000 books. It was in February on parapsychology. And I bought the books. We put them in our basement. There was a huge blizzard the next day. And I was at the store shoveling. And I was saying, and all of a sudden, I'm starting to get phone calls, people calling me about this collection of I didn't tell anybody about it. And I'm saying the vibes just sort of went out. Well, it was a blizzard. There was what it turned out was I had outbid a couple of other dealers, and they told some of their customers. So there was actually an explanation, but it was an unusual collection. And some unusual things have happened when you go to houses. And again, I've got them all listed there. Two unusual things that I'll mention, and then I'll tell the last couple of stories. I went to a lady's house. She had died, but the family was selling it. It was Ashland, Framingham, somewhere, and in the house backed on woods. And I was looking through the collections, a lot of books on nature and so on, and all of a sudden the back door, there was a deck, and the bell on the deck starts ringing and ringing and ringing. It was around noon. And I look out on the back porch, and there were a bunch of raccoons pushing. Turned out the lady used to feed the raccoons at noon, at lunchtime. So they come up every day at noon and ring the bell. I mean, you never know. And then the next story, I don't want this to seem, it's just unusual. We have a customer who eats Bibles, literally. She rips out pages and eats them. She takes in the Word of God. And she's wonderful. She's a wonderful woman. She obviously has some issues. What a lot of people don't realize is up the street from us, there's a convent on West Street. There's a liturgical store, but it's actually a convent. They actually keep a Bible for her so that she doesn't rip up a lot of Bibles. She only eats the Douay version, the Catholic version. She will not eat a King James Bible. And she's the nicest lady in the world, but she obviously has issues. We hadn't seen her for about 6 or 8 months. And she came in, and my manager buzzed me to come down. Oh, she's here. And she's nice. I like her. And, you lose a Bible here or there, but whatever. And I was talking with her about eating Bibles for about 20 minutes. And she was talking about the pros and cons and how people looked at it and all this. And she left. And I said to my manager, you know what was really strange about that conversation? Is that I was talking to this lady for 20 minutes about the pros and cons of literally eating Bibles. And I didn't find it that strange. That was the strange part about it. It was like, well, yeah. So in any case, I could go on and on. I'll tell 2 last stories, one about Bibles, and one, like I said, the most valuable, what I think is the most valuable book. I have a copy. It was done in the 1950s, a very nice copy of The Night Before Christmas. It's nicely illustrated, nicely done. I have this copy, and that copy of The Night Before Christmas, I have read to my children from the time they were born every single Christmas Eve. And like I say, now they're in their late 30s, early 40s. And now they have 4 grandchildren between them, and I've read it to them every Christmas Eve, to the point where one of my daughters is married to a man from Texas. Now, I think they're very smart. They live around here. But a lot of times Christmas, they go down and see his family, who are wonderful. But before FaceTime, I actually recorded myself reading on that copy on YouTube so she could see it. One of my daughters lives in Kenya. So to read it to my grandson, you have to take into account there's 8 hours difference. And then a 2-year-old goes to bed at literally I was reading it almost a day before Christmas Eve. But that copy of The Night Before Christmas, I have read to my children. That copy means more to me, is more valuable to me, is more precious to me than almost any other book that I have. Now, my daughter who lives here keeps it. She goes, so you can't sell it, or I can't lose it. But that one means more to me than almost any other book. Well, not almost. It means more to me than any book. So that's my most valuable book. The last story, I got called to a large old church in Boston, well over 100 years old. They called me in. They had an area like this, but it was on 3 levels with huge library in the church, huge church. But they just wanted me in there to look through and see if they had accumulated any valuable books. And actually, I spent a day there, and it was fun. They actually had some good books and enjoyed it. At the end of the day, the priest said to me, could you come down the basement? There were some more books. So I went down the basement. There were some more books. And then there was a closet. It was actually more like a small room. It would have covered this area. And the priest opened the door, front to ceiling, top to bottom, front to back. It was filled with thousands of old Bibles. And I looked at the priest and I said, well, what is this? He says, well, people hate to throw away a book. They feel it's sacrilegious to throw away a Bible. So what happens when a parishioner dies and the family doesn't want their Bible? They come and they present it to the church. And he says, what do? We very graciously accept it. We don't want to offend anybody. Then we go downstairs, open the door, put it in with the rest of them. And he goes, and we can't drive a dumpster up to the back of the church and fill it full of Bibles. That would just be terrible. So I use it as an example to say that if you want to give something to a charity, ask them if they want it first. If they want it and can use it, great. If not, you're really not doing anyone a favor. I've got my card up here, although if you Google, our website comes up. If you ever have any questions about books, book collecting, value, whatever, just call, send emails. We're always happy to help. If you like the stories, Brattlecast, and anyone who brought any books, I'm not going to do it publicly, but I'll just very quickly look, and either you can crowd around or whatever. But I'll say thank you for coming. I appreciate it. And stop in the store sometime, too. Thank you.